There's a peculiar beauty in waking up to the same morning again, not because you crave repetition, but because time itself has cornered you, forcing you to study every breath, every decision, until you either master life or surrender to it. When I first watched Edge of Tomorrow, I wasn't prepared for how closely it mirrored that feeling we all get when life throws us into chaos and demands performance before understanding. You know that quiet panic before presentation, a confrontation, or a test. Multiply that by an alien invasion and a ticking clock, and you have the rhythm of the story. The film, starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, introduces us to a war fought not just on battlefields, but within the human psyche, where dying is less an end and more a chance to try again. From its very first sequence, I felt the exhaustion of living on borrowed time, each sunrise more mechanical, each death a tutorial for the next attempt at survival. It's a movie about repetition that never feels repetitive, a story about war that somehow feels intimate, personal, and alive. The world it opens with is bleak yet electrifying, a Europe devoured by a species of alien mimics that move like liquid lightning, shredding through human defenses faster than governments can plan. Humanity's last stand hinges on a technology that allows soldiers to wear mechanical exosuits, amplifying strength and endurance, but inside them beat fragile, terrified hearts. And into this crucible walks a man who is not a hero by any definition. Major William Cage, a public relations officer with no combat experience, suddenly ordered to the front lines as punishment. His arrogance, charm, and panic fuse into a strangely relatable fear, the kind of fear we all hide under competence. The first time he dies, it's brutal, almost darkly comedic. The second time, it's bewildering. The third, revelatory. By the 10th, we realize we're not watching a soldier story anymore, but an existential loop, one that forces him to confront courage, love, and inevitability itself. There's something hypnotic about the way the film blends its futuristic machinery with the raw helplessness of being human. I remember noticing how each repetition stripped a layer off Cage's personality, the smugness dissolving into desperation, the desperation into quiet precision, and finally, something resembling acceptance. It's as if time itself was training him, sculpting not his muscles but his moral reflexes. Opposite him stands Rita Vertasky, the war's most celebrated warrior, known to soldiers as the Angel of Verdun. Emily Blunt embodies her with a cold grace that's almost mythical, and yet beneath the armor there's the same fatigue, the same awareness that victory is fleeting when every win is built on countless deaths. The chemistry between them isn't romantic in the traditional sense. It's tragic, disciplined, forged in repetition and loss. Every time they meet, she doesn't remember him, but he remembers every moment, every glance, every death. That imbalance gives their relationship a haunting rhythm, as though he's falling in love with someone trapped behind a glass wall that resets each morning. The structure of Edge of Tomorrow plays with the viewer's endurance the same way the loop plays with Cage's mind. We start laughing at his clumsiness, those repeated training deaths, those exasperated yells of frustration. But soon it dawns on us that this comedy of errors hides a slow psychological unraveling. What would happen if every failure in your life replayed endlessly until you perfected your response? Would you grow or collapse? The film answers through subtle evolution. The quick cuts, the steady compression time, the shift from chaos to choreography. By the midpoint, we're no longer spectators. We're accomplices in his fatigue. The editing mirrors muscle memory. Shorter, sharper, cleaner, just like how our own minds learn through pain. There's a strange catharsis in watching Cruise's character die over and over again. Usually, Hollywood protects its stars from humiliation, but here, the spectacle is humiliation itself. Repetition as punishment, repetition as progress. Every time he rises from the ground gasping, I can't help but think of how many times we, too, wake up to the same fears, the same mistakes, swearing that this day will be different. The science fiction veneer only disguises what is essentially a deeply human story about self-reconstruction. Cage's journey isn't just about defeating aliens. It's about learning to earn his own redemption one death at a time. Even the design of the world seems to conspire toward that lesson. The battlefields look drenched in rust and ash, like echoes of a century of warfare compressed into one eternal morning. There's no glamour in these explosions, Only grit, wet mud, and steel. Every frame feels heavy, exhausted, yet vibrant in its precision. Doug Liman's direction has that restless energy, part born, part nightmare. But the camera never lingers long enough for comfort. The sound of exocets clanking, bullets whizzing, and alarms blaring blends into a language of dread, reminding us that war has no pause button, even when time itself does. When I first watched it, I remember pausing midway through. Not because I was bored, but because I needed to breathe. The pace, the concept, the relentlessness. It all mirrors a modern condition. Our lives filled with constant retries, deadlines, updates, do-overs. It's a fantasy of control over failure, the illusion that with enough attempts, we can master everything. But what makes Edge of Tomorrow so devastating is that even mastery comes with loss. Every perfected move costs another forgotten moment, another erased connection. It's the paradox of progress, learning so much that you lose what made you human in the first place. The film teases us with that tension right from the beginning. The promise that repetition will lead to perfection. But at what cost? The more Cage remembers, the more isolated he becomes. The more he masters the battle, the further he drifts from the people he's trying to save. It's an elegant metaphor for every overachiever's curse, the loneliness of competence. And yet, somewhere within that exhaustion lies the film's tenderest core, the possibility that love and meaning can still bloom inside the loop, even if they must die with every reset. By the time the first act closes, you can feel your pulse sinking with the movie's rhythm, death, rebirth, recalibration. There's no turning back now. The tone has shifted from absurd to profound, from chaos to choreography, and you realize the film isn't about escaping the loop at all. It's about what you become inside it. The tease of what's to come, a convergence of memory, sacrifice, and time, is what makes you lean closer. You sense that the next loop might not just change the battle, but Cage himself. And that's where the magic lies. Not in breaking the cycle, but in transforming within it. The story begins with chaos disguised as order, television anchors blurring into one another, political reassurances echoing over images of destruction. Humanity has never looked more disciplined or more desperate. We see recruitment campaigns, medals pinned to trembling chests, commanders pretending that strategy still exists. And then, amid this performance, appears Major William Cage, polished, persuasive, and utterly unprepared for war. He's the smiling face of propaganda, selling victory to the public like a product. What struck me instantly was how his confidence felt fragile, like a man balancing his dignity on a blade. When General Brigham summons him to headquarters and casually informs him that he'll be joining the invasion, Cage's smile cracks. He protests, negotiates, even threatens, that instinctive dance we all perform when cornered by reality. But the general has no patience for charm. Within minutes, Cage is stripped of rank, handcuffed, and shipped off as cannon fodder to a training camp where soldiers don't salute him. They mock him. The first act inside the camp feels like punishment from fate. The world around him is grimy, indifferent, mechanical, steel barracks, barking sergeants, the smell of oil and sweat. Sergeant Farrell, played with cold amusement by Bill Paxton, introduces Cage to his new identity. A private among killers, a coward among believers. Watching Cruz's face in those moments, I could feel his humiliation. It's the face of every person forced into a reality they've spent their lives avoiding. The exosuit, which looks glorious in propaganda videos, becomes his Cage, heavy, complex, almost mocking in how unresponsive it is to his panic. Then comes the first battle. The film doesn't ease us in. It drops us from orbit into a storm of fire and mud. The beach assault is pure cinematic chaos. Explosions erupt before logic and form. The camera whirls as soldiers are torn apart by blindingly fast alien mimics. The imagery recalls Saving Private Ryan, but with an alien pulse. Bodies flung, time fractured, the world ending one bullet at a time. Cage, terrified, barely manages to fire his weapon. His screams merge with static and gunfire as he stumbles, slips, and eventually confronts a monstrous, blue-lit mimic. He pulls a pin on a grenade, and for a moment you think maybe courage has surfaced. Then everything goes white. Death. And then morning again. The brilliance of this loop isn't in its science fiction logic, but in its emotional disorientation. Cage wakes up handcuffed on the tarmac. Sergeant Farrell shouting the same lines, soldiers jeering the same jokes, the same helicopter engines roaring overhead. Confusion floods his face. Disbelief follows, then panic. He tries to explain what's happening. I've been here before. But to everyone else, he sounds insane. The film captures that surreal déjà vu perfectly. The way repetition erodes sanity when no one else notices it. Each time he dies, crushed, shot, exploded, the rhythm tightens. The audience starts anticipating failure, and yet every failure becomes another lesson. Somewhere in the middle of these loops, Cage spots her, Rita Vertasky, the angel of Verdun. The soldiers worship her like a myth, but she's very much human, forged by trauma. When Cage saves her once, she looks into his eyes and calmly says, "Find me when you wake up." It's the first moment of connection, the first sign that this madness might have rules. When he wakes again, he hunts her down and discovers that she once had the same ability. The loop belonged to her until she lost it. Together, they become unwilling partners in an experiment against fate. Their training sequences are both cruel and funny. Rita kills him whenever he's too slow or useless, resetting the day so they can refine every motion. It's absurdly brutal, a montage of broken bones, snapped necks, quick deaths. But underneath it lies an intimacy that no ordinary relationship could contain. He begins to memorize her movements, her words, her silences. She remains distant, professional. But you can sense his growing attachment, the sadness of loving someone who never remembers you. What fascinated me most about this first half is how repetition evolves from comedy into philosophy. At first, Cage's panic is slapstick. By his 20th death, it becomes meditation. The editing mirrors this change. Jump cuts turn into fluid rhythms, showing mastery born from despair. With each loop, he grows sharper, stronger, less human. He starts predicting every line, every explosion, every death on the beach. The war stops feeling like chaos. It becomes choreography, and he, its weary dancer. Yet the victory he seeks always slips away, like time mocking him for daring to understand it. Eventually, he and Rita begin seeking the Omega, the high brain of the alien species. They travel to a military scientist, Dr. Carter, who explains the biology of the loop. The blood of an alpha mimic has fused with Cage's, linking him to the enemy's temporal mechanism. The explanation is sleek, almost clinical, but emotionally it lands harder. His immortality isn't a gift. It's contamination. To kill the Omega means surrendering the very thing keeping him alive. It's here that the film's tension deepens. Every reset saves humanity, but erases progress. Every success demands starting over. Watching him accept that futility reminded me of how we replay conversations in our heads, wishing we'd said the right words. Except he actually can, and still, it costs him pieces of himself. The first half crescendos with their plan to reach Verdun again, to retrace Rita's legendary victory. But fate, even when looped, refuses to be predictable. No matter how perfectly he plans, something breaks, a soldier trips, an explosion shifts, a mimic appears where it shouldn't. The universe keeps whispering, "You cannot master me." And by the time they reach that farmhouse, drenched and exhausted, he's memorized her every death. He's seen it hundreds of times, and he cannot bear to see it again. So, for the first time, he lies. He doesn't reset. He lets her live in that brief illusion of progress. That moment, quiet and rain-soaked, marks the emotional midpoint. The soldier she once mocked as cowardly now carries the unbearable weight of omniscience. By then, the audience is as tired as he is, not bored, but spiritually drained. The repetition has turned into empathy. We feel the loop's exhaustion in our bones. And when the sequence ends with a silent stare over a map glowing under flickering light, we realize he's not fighting aliens anymore. He's fighting inevitability, the cruel geometry of time that grants knowledge but robs meaning. That's where the first half leaves us, suspended between progress and despair, unsure whether victory means breaking the loop or finally accepting it. By the time the second half begins, something in Cage has changed forever. He no longer moves like a man stumbling through borrowed days. He moves like someone who's lived lifetimes inside a single sunrise. His eyes, once wide with disbelief, now carry that quiet precision that only exhaustion can carve. Rita still trains beside him, oblivious to the hundreds of loops he's endured, but he's already lived through every possibility of her death. The battlefield, once chaos, has become muscle memory to him, yet the meaning has drained away. When the day resets yet again, he doesn't rush to save anyone. He pauses, watches faces he's seen die countless times. There's something unbearably human in that stillness, that quiet ache of knowing too much and caring too deeply. It's the curse of repetition, to love the world and still be forced to lose it every morning. The story takes a darker tone here. Cage begins avoiding Rita altogether, trying to reach the Omega alone. He sneaks past checkpoints, drives stolen vehicles, moves like a ghost through the machinery of war. The loops that once sharpened him are now devouring him. The film shifts from a story of survival to one of identity. Who do you become when time no longer holds you accountable? Watching him drive alone through the French countryside, I could feel that eerie calm that follows madness. He's memorized not only the war, but the geography of existence itself. He knows every wrong turn, every death, every road that leads to nowhere. When he finally finds the location of the Omega, a hidden chamber under the Louvre in Paris, the discovery feels anticlimactic, not because it's underwhelming, but because it comes at the cost of his humanity. He realizes that he can't reach it as long as he keeps resetting. To destroy the Omega, he'll need to lose the loop, to let death become final again. This is the film's cruelest irony. The only way to win is to surrender immortality. It's here that the loop becomes a metaphor for control, our desperate desire to fix life by replaying it, to avoid mistakes by reliving them. And the film quietly whispers that perfection means nothing if you never move forward. In one of the most haunting sequences, Cage deliberately gets himself injured, knowing that if he receives a blood transfusion, he'll lose the looping ability. The sound of the machine humming beside him, the beeping monitor, the quiet resignation on his face, it feels like a funeral for invincibility. The next time he wakes up, it's truly the last time. You can feel the weight of finality pressing down. No more retries. No more restarts. This is it. Rita meets him again, unaware of how many times he's carried her memory. They gather a small, ragtag team of soldiers, men and women he's met and lost in 1,000 different ways. He knows their quirks, their fates, their last words, but this time he doesn't have the heart to warn them. The mission is doomed, but he leads them anyway. There's something beautiful about that, the acceptance of imperfection, the grace in doing something even when you know it will end badly. Their drop into Paris is unlike the earlier beach landings. It's slower, heavier, drenched in a kind of melancholic courage. The city, submerged under water and ruin, glows faintly blue from the alien hive pulsing beneath. The sound design softens, less bombast, more dread. They crash land, swim through wreckage, push against collapsing debris. Every motion feels like an echo of all the loops that led here. The tension isn't in whether they'll win. It's in knowing that this time, if they die, it's real. Inside the Louvre, the visuals turn almost spiritual. The alien hive thrums like a heartbeat, the air thick with blue light and silence. Cage and Rita share a brief look. No words, just understanding. It's the culmination of every lifetime they've shared in fragments. She kisses him, not as a lover, but as someone acknowledging the end of the story written in repetition. Then she rushes forward, drawing the mimic swarm away, and Cage dives into the depths. The Omega looms before him, massive and ancient, its tendrils weaving through water and stone like veins of eternity. He pulls the grenades and the world folds into light. Death again, but this one feels different. Instead of looping back to the chaos of the camp, he wakes up much earlier, before his arrest, before the invasion, before the bloodshed. It's morning again, but peaceful. The war has ended overnight. The news anchors are smiling. The Omega is gone. The loops have rewritten time itself, erasing the invasion entirely. And when he walks into the training area and sees Rita alive, her eyes sharp, her stance guarded, unaware of who he is, the silence that follows is unbearable. He smiles faintly, exhausted, relieved, and quietly broken. That ending has always divided people. Some call it too neat. Others see it as the only possible closure. For me, it's a paradox of hope. A man who has lived through infinite deaths now gets one more life, but stripped of the only person who truly understood him. It's not triumph, it's mercy. The final smile isn't victory. It's surrender to the mystery of existence. He's no longer trying to control time. He's finally willing to live in it. As the credits rolled, I remember sitting still, letting the echoes of those loops fade. The film leaves you with that peculiar ache, the sense that time is both cruel and kind, that mastery means nothing without meaning, and that love, even when erased, leaves a shape in your soul. In the end, Cage's story isn't about defeating aliens or escaping a loop. It's about learning to die enough times to truly live once. There's something fascinating about how this film disguises a character study inside the armor of an action movie. Strip away the exosuits, the aliens, the spectacle, and you're left with a story about two people. One learning how to be human again, and the other remembering what it means to trust. Major William Cage begins as the most unheroic protagonist imaginable. Manipulative, self-serving, allergic to pain. When he first enters the war, he's not a soldier at all. He's a salesman dressed in military uniform, pitching courage he doesn't possess. Yet, that's what makes his transformation so mesmerizing. Most heroes rise because they believe in something. Cage rises because he's given no choice but to face himself. Tom Cruise brings a nervous energy to Cage that feels strangely honest. In his early scenes, his expressions wobble between charm and panic, as though he's constantly calculating the audience's reaction to his confidence. But the loop strips him of performance. Every repetition forces him to shed a layer of ego until all that's left is instinct. Not courage in the romantic sense, but survival that slowly evolves into sacrifice. Watching that evolution feels like witnessing a psychological exfoliation, the peeling away of lies until the truth of character emerges. By the film's midpoint, his bravado has turned into weariness, his voice softer, his eyes heavier. He stops begging for escape and starts rehearsing grace. What makes his arc so profound is that it's not about gaining strength but about losing illusion. He doesn't become a hero because he's trained. He becomes one because time has humiliated him into humility. The brilliance of the script lies in how it turns repetition into revelation. Each loop is a therapy session disguised as war. Every death is a tiny moral correction. Every reset an apology to life itself. When Cage begins caring about the soldiers who died beside him, the ones he used to ignore, it's not because he's noble. It's because their deaths have become familiar, personal. Familiarity breeds empathy. Repetition, ironically, humanizes him. The film dares to suggest that even a coward, when given infinite attempts, can evolve into someone worth following. It's not divine destiny. It's disciplined awakening. Opposite him, Rita Vrataski stands as both mentor and mirror. She's the soldier Cage pretends to be, efficient, unflinching, and unromantic about death. Emily Blunt inhabits her with a precision that's rare in science fiction, the kind of femininity that doesn't announce itself. When she first appears covered in grime, stretching in the middle of the battlefield, she radiates control, not arrogance, just fluency in chaos. What's striking is that she, too, has lived through loops before. She's already endured the madness Cage is drowning in. Her calm detachment isn't strength born from ignorance. It's the numbness of someone who has suffered through infinity and survived it. She trains him ruthlessly because she understands the cost of sentiment. Every time he hesitates, she kills him without hesitation, a mercy killing, really, one that spares him longer pain. But beneath her stoicism lies exhaustion. The audience feels in her smallest gestures, the silence after a joke, the brief softening of her eyes before she shoots him again. She's not cruel. She's conditioned. The tragedy of Rita's character is that she's constantly reborn into the same hell without the memory of its lessons. She's the eternal student of pain, cursed to relearn what she's already mastered. And when Cage begins remembering everything, their dynamic flips. He becomes a custodian of their shared grief, carrying her memories for her. There's a strange intimacy in that imbalance. Every time she dies, he absorbs the weight of it, like a historian of suffering who keeps the record so she doesn't have to. The chemistry between Cruise and Blunt is restrained yet electric. There's no romantic subplot in the conventional sense, and that's exactly what gives their connection depth. Love here is not attraction. It's recognition. It's the quiet realization that they're the only two beings who understand the unbearable loneliness of repetition. The single kiss they share near the end doesn't erupt with passion. It's an elegy, a farewell between souls who have met countless times and are parting for the last. It's one of those rare cinematic moments that earns its silence. Nothing more needed to be said. The supporting cast, Sergeant Farrell and the squad, serve as echoes of humanity's various masks. Farrell, with his sermon-like monologues, represents blind duty, the comfort of structure. The squad, a collage of quirks and defiance, embodies those who live without realizing how close they are to death. Each time the loop resets, their dialogue repeats, but it's never identical in tone. It's a reminder that even in sameness, perception changes. What's remarkable is how the film uses these side characters to highlight Cage's transformation. At the beginning, he mocks them. By the end, he memorizes them. That memorization isn't strategic. It's sacred. Psychologically, Cage's journey mirrors trauma survivors who relive their worst moments until numbness turns into understanding. He starts by running from fear, then rehearses it, then befriends it. By the final act, fear becomes his companion. Not an enemy, but a familiar whisper reminding him he's alive. The loop functions as an external metaphor for internal rebirth. Every death a small ego dying. Every reset a renewed consciousness. The film doesn't glorify resilience. It dignifies repetition. Rita, on the other hand, represents the acceptance of impermanence. She's a paradox Cage cannot reconcile. Someone who once had the power to rewrite time, but chooses to live without it. Her willingness to die in the final act, not to reset, not to repeat, but to conclude, becomes a moral counterpoint to Cage's obsessive looping. Through her, he learns that courage isn't endless endurance. It's the ability to face a single, unrepeatable moment and still step forward. What binds both of them is the quiet tragedy of memory. For him, every reset preserves too much. For her, every day erases too quickly. They orbit each other like two planets caught in separate gravities. Their relationship is proof that connection doesn't require continuity, that even fleeting moments can be eternal when carried in the soul. By the end, when she no longer remembers him, his smile carries all their shared timelines, all the lives they lived together across invisible boundaries of time. It's a smile that belongs to no genre, not sci-fi, not romance, just a human condition distilled into a single expression of relief and loss. If you watch carefully, you'll notice how the performances evolve without changing lines. Cruise's tone of "what day is it?" mutates from confusion to dread to acceptance. Blunt's "come find me when you wake up" transforms from instruction to prophecy. Their faces do the storytelling that dialogue refuses to. It's rare in a film built on explosions and technology to find so much poetry in expressions. In the end, both characters represent different responses to mortality. Cage, the student of infinity, learns that control is an illusion. Rita, the master of impermanence, teaches that meaning is born from endings. Together, they embody the ultimate paradox of life, that only by dying countless times do we learn how to live once. When I think of them, I don't see a hero and his mentor. I see two mirrors, facing each other forever, reflecting courage back and forth until it becomes indistinguishable from love. Every film has its secrets, those strange little fragments of creation that reveal how art is born from chaos. What makes the stories behind-the-scenes truths so compelling is how often they mirror the movie's theme: repetition, adaptation, and survival through trial. The first strange fact that fascinated me was that this film almost didn't exist in the form we know. Its source material was a Japanese light novel with the very un-Hollywood title All You Need Is Kill, written by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. The title itself sounds like a philosophy carved out of exhaustion, short, sharp, fatalistic. When Warner Brothers bought the rights, the early drafts were far darker, far more existential, and far less comedic. Cage died hundreds more times, sometimes in grotesque or surreal ways. The tone leaned closer to a psychological labyrinth than a blockbuster, but the studio feared that audiences would find it too bleak. They wanted hope, not horror, and so, through countless rewrites, fittingly loops of their own, the story evolved into something brisker, brighter, yet just as tragic beneath the surface. Tom Cruise was drawn to the project precisely because it terrified him. He was in his early 50s when production began, yet insisted on doing the majority of his stunts himself. The mechanical suits, those heavy exoskeletons that looked like the future of warfare, weren't digital illusions at first. They were real, each weighing between 80 and 130 pounds, assembled from metal frames and hydraulic joints. Actors couldn't even sit down between takes. They hung from ceiling rigs like exhausted marionettes. Emily Blunt once said in an interview that she cried on her first day wearing the armor because of how painful it was to move. Tom Cruise, trying to comfort her, told her to stop being such a wuss. And she laughed, right before tripping and landing flat on her face. That moment, she later said, was when she realized how absurdly human production was a mirror of the film itself, where every mistake became a lesson, every fall another rehearsal. Another bizarre truth. Doug Liman, the director, deliberately avoided mapping out the exact logic of the time loop. He believed that if the characters themselves didn't fully understand it, the audience shouldn't either. "It's not science," he once said. "It's emotional math." That phrase always stayed with me. Emotional math. That's what the film is really built on. Time isn't mechanic. It's a metaphor for self-correction. Liman even told the editors to keep continuity errors in certain loop sequences to make the repetition feel disorienting. Some background extras appear in slightly different positions in repeated scenes, almost subliminally, like the universe glitching. Most viewers never notice, but the subconscious does. It creates that faint unease, that uncanny sense of living a day that's both the same and slightly off. One of the strangest decisions during production was the refusal to rely heavily on green screens. Most of the combat scenes were filmed on location. Airfields, real beaches, vast muddy pits recreated in the English countryside. Hundreds of tons of sand were dumped on military property to simulate the invasion of France. Rain machines, pyrotechnics, helicopters, it was chaos, and Liman loved it. His approach was to make his actors suffer physically, so their exhaustion would look real. "If they're not miserable," he said, "it won't feel like war." And so the crew lived through their own loop of fatigue and repetition, shooting the same scenes dozens of times until everything looked slightly spontaneous, slightly broken, like memory itself. Even the film's editing history reads like its plot. Warner Brothers executives were reportedly confused by early cuts. They said it was too repetitive, ironically missing the point. The editor spent months fine-tuning the balance between déjà vu and momentum, removing whole sequences where Cage died in comedic or grotesque ways. In one scrap scene, he was crushed by a falling dropship while trying to impress Rita. In another, he died mid-sentence, mid-confession. Those were cut not for content, but for rhythm. Liman said he wanted the loops to feel like chapters in a conversation with fate, not gags. He once compared the editing process to learning to dance with time, and I think that's why the finished product flows like a heartbeat. Steady, human, never mechanical. There's also a quiet irony in how the movie's title itself went through its own loop. Initially released as Edge of Tomorrow, it underperformed in American theaters. Audiences were intrigued but confused. The marketing failed to capture its tone. Months later, when the film was released on Blu-ray, the tagline live, "Die, Repeat," which had been a slogan in the posters, became so popular that people assumed it was a real title. Warner Brothers, realizing their accidental genius, began selling it under that name. The same movie, reborn under a new identity, finally found recognition. Another reincarnation, another loop completed. It was a fitting echo of the film's message. You fail, you adapt, you try again. Even the title had to die to live. Tom Cruise reportedly kept a personal death diary during filming, a list of every way his character died in the movie, from explosions to gunshots to alien tentacles. He said it helped him internalize the absurdity of Cage's life, and it's probably why his performance never feels repetitive. Every death has its own flavor of realization, its own note of pain or irony. Emily Blunt, meanwhile, trained for months in Krav Maga and Olympic-style weightlifting to move authentically in her suit. The graceful yet mechanical precision of her movements wasn't choreography. It was conditioning. Her body learned to respond to the armor as if it were alive. She even based Rita's posture on soldiers who had spent too long at war, straight back but heavy-eyed, composed but brittle. Another odd detail that delights me, The mimics were inspired by jellyfish, not insect or reptiles, as one might assume. The animation team wanted something fluid, unreadable, and unnatural. Their movement was designed using algorithms that mimic fractal motion, patterns that never repeat exactly the same way twice. That's why they look so alien. They're literally impossible to predict. Every frame of them is chaos, pretending to be form. Doug Liman loved this contradiction so much that he instructed his sound designers to create mimic noises from reversed animal screams, metallic shreds, and distorted recordings of underwater volcanoes. If you listen closely, their screech carries both mechanical distortion and something organic, as though the universe itself is howling. The last and strangest fact is perhaps poetic justice. Despite its initial lukewarm box office performance, the film gained massive traction through word of mouth, and over time, audiences returned to it again and again. It became a looping phenomenon, watched repeatedly by fans who claimed it got better with every viewing. Like its protagonist, it failed, reset, and found its strength. In retrospect, even its journey from underdog to cult classic mirrors Cage's evolution. Unappreciated at first, later celebrated for its resilience. It's almost as if the movie itself was caught in its own time loop, waiting for the world to catch up to its brilliance. So, when I think of the strangest facts surrounding it, what stands out isn't the technology or the trivia. It's that everything about its making, from its evolving title to its grueling shoot, from its missteps to its rebirth, embodies the same mantra whispered through its story. Live, die, repeat. The film, its creators, even its audience, all participated in that endless cycle of imperfection striving for mastery. And perhaps that's why, even years later, it feels alive, a movie that learned, quite literally, how to survive its own failures. When Edge of Tomorrow first premiered, critics seemed uncertain about what kind of film they were watching. Was it an action blockbuster, a philosophical parable, or a dark comedy about futility? Most couldn't decide, and that indecision became the first critical conversation around it. It's fascinating how the earliest reviews felt like different versions of the same day, echoing each other's contradictions. Some praised its intelligence, others accused it of emotional sterility. Some hailed it as a reinvention of the time loop genre, others dismissed it as a mechanical gimmick. In hindsight, those divided reactions mirror the film itself. Misunderstood at first, gradually refined by time. Just like its protagonist, many critics compared it to Groundhog Day, the obvious ancestor of all loop narratives. But what made this film distinct was its refusal to romanticize repetition. Groundhog Day used looping as spiritual redemption. Edge of Tomorrow weaponized it. The humor was darker, the learning curve steeper, the message harsher. Improvement doesn't guarantee peace. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence became a reference point for several academic essays that followed. The idea that one must live life as if they were condemned to repeat it infinitely and find joy even in that repetition. Critics from The Atlantic and The Guardian wrote about how Cage's journey embodies Nietzsche's challenge. To affirm existence even when stripped of novelty. What struck me most was how audiences gradually absorbed his philosophy without realizing it. By the final act, we're no longer craving victory, but catharsis through endurance. There was also a quiet but profound feminist reading of the movie that emerged later. Emily Blunt's portrayal of Rita Vrataski disrupted the typical action heroine archetype. She wasn't sexualized, romanticized, or rescued. She existed as a symbol of autonomy and discipline. Scholars noted how rare it was, especially in 2014, to see a female character training, killing, and commanding respect without her narrative orbiting around love or trauma. Rita's reputation as the angel of Verdun echoed Joan of Arc's myth, but with a modern twist. Instead of divine voices, she had repetition as her god. Feminist critics loved how her presence inverted the usual Hollywood dynamic. She was a mentor, he the apprentice. One writer called her the first blockbuster saying repetition, and that phrase stuck with me. Another layer of criticism revolved around its treatment of death. Unlike most action films, death here is neither tragic nor heroic. It's procedural. Critics from Film Comment observe how Liman's direction reframed mortality as data, each death feeding a larger equation. Yet paradoxically, that repetition made every human gesture, every shared glance, every breath feel sacred. The constant dying turned life itself into art. This idea resonated strongly with Eastern philosophy enthusiasts. Japanese critics pointed out that the film's spiritual core owes more to Buddhist thought than Western heroism. The loop mirrors samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth, with enlightenment achieved only when attachment to control is relinquished. In that reading, Cage's final acceptance of death isn't defeat, it's awakening. From a cinematic perspective, critics admired the editing precision that allowed comedy and despair to coexist. The New York Times called it a war film edited like a heartbeat. Every loop, they said, mimics the human learning process: shock, frustration, mastery, exhaustion, acceptance. The repetition becomes choreography, and the editing is an invisible teacher. One reviewer beautifully wrote, "It's not the aliens he's fighting, it's the monotony of existence." That single line captures why the film endures beyond its spectacle. Commercially, the movie's release was almost as ironic as its story. It opened strong overseas but underperformed in the U.S., partly due to confusing marketing. Critics who revisited it months later began calling it the best blockbuster nobody watched. Word of mouth, however, turned it into a slow-burn classic. By the time it reached streaming platforms, essays and retrospectives had reevaluated it as one of the most sophisticated sci-fi films of the decade. Its second life in public consciousness felt poetic, as if the film itself had reset to try again. Several major film festivals later hosted panels discussing its influence on narrative structure. Directors and editors dissected its loop logic, noting how it balanced predictability with surprise. One fascinating observation came from a sight and sound symposium. They pointed out that Liman uses repetition not to stretch time but to compress it, achieving character growth that feels earned without the drag of exposition. It's as if the film compresses an entire trilogy's worth of development into 2 hours, using repetition as acceleration. Psychologists and narrative theorists also joined the conversation. They interpreted Cage's journey through the lens of trauma therapy. In exposure therapy, patients are repeatedly confronted with traumatic stimuli until desensitization occurs. Cage's loops function exactly that way. Exposure until mastery, pain until neutrality. Each reset is a controlled reenactment of fear. Clinical psychologists praise how authentically the film represents the stages of acceptance: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, meaning. It's science fiction serving as psychological allegory. The film also sparked philosophical debates about agency. Does Cage truly have free will if his every action is confined to a loop? Critics split between two schools: the determinists, who argued that the loop negates autonomy, and the existentialists, who insisted that awareness of repetition grants freedom within structure. French critics in particular adored this tension, calling the movie Camus in combat armor. They drew parallels to Albert Camus' myth of Sisyphus, where a condemned man finds joy in pushing the boulder eternally uphill. Cage's smile in the final scene, subtle and ambiguous, was interpreted as his acceptance of absurdity. He cannot control time, but he can control meaning. As months passed, universities began teaching it in film theory courses. Its mix of Hollywood action and metaphysical subtext made it irresistible to scholars. They analyzed the interplay of masculine vulnerability and militaristic critique, how the film simultaneously glorifies and satirizes warfare. In particular, the repeating invasion sequence was seen as commentary on Western interventionism, endless wars sold under the illusion of progress. Every reset becomes another operation, another justification, another cycle of violence dressed as salvation. The critical consensus eventually settled into admiration. Rotten Tomatoes rose from the mid-70s to over 90% as retrospective reviews poured in. What was once a clever gimmick became a modern classic of existential cinema. Critics praised its balance of spectacle and substance, and the tone of reappraisal felt almost tender, as if the world was apologizing for misunderstanding it. Even those who had dismissed it returned with humility, realizing that it had aged better than nearly every blockbuster of its time. The movie's longevity, they noted, wasn't due to its effects but to its empathy. Beneath all the looping chaos was a simple truth: the human spirit learns, forgets, and learns again. One of the most beautiful critical reflections came from the late Roger Ebert's website, written by a younger critic years after the film's release. He said, "If war is repetition, then compassion is rebellion. That line still echoes in my mind. Because in the end, what Cage and Rita discover, what the audience discovers, isn't how to survive infinite days, but how to make one day count. The film may speak in the language of science fiction, but its heartbeat belongs to every soul who has ever wished for another chance. So, when I think about how critics eventually loop back to love this film, it feels fitting. The art of understanding often takes repetition. Some truths need to be lived or watched over and over before they finally reveal themselves. Behind the immaculate choreography of Edge of Tomorrow lies a battlefield of its own, a story of chaos, exhaustion, improvisation, and ingenuity that somehow birthed one of the most technically precise films of its decade. You can sense it in every frame. This wasn't made in sterile comfort. It was wrestled into existence. Doug Liman, known for his volatile shooting style, treated the set like a living experiment rather than a production line. He would show up each morning with new ideas, new camera angles, sometimes entirely new dialogue, leaving his crew both terrified and alive. The looping motif wasn't just in the script. It seeped into the making. Scenes were reblocked, res-hot, and reinvented so many times that the cast began joking they were trapped in their own film. The design of those exosuits became both the film's greatest triumph and its private torment. Instead of relying on computer graphics, Liman wanted weight, friction, the clumsy dignity of real machinery. The suits were built by Pierre Bohanna's team, the same designers who crafted the Batmobile for The Dark Knight, using metal, carbon fiber, and intricate hydraulics. Tom Cruise's model weighed close to 125 pounds. Emily Blunt's, a lighter version, still crushed her shoulders. They rehearsed weeks just to learn how to walk naturally. Emily once said that when she first tried to run, she looked like a drunk insect. Liman refused to pity them. If you're not miserable, it won't feel like war, he kept reminding the cast. In a sense, their pain was method acting through physics. You can almost hear the weight in every clang of the armor, authenticity bought with bruises. Shooting the beach invasion was a logistical nightmare. The production took over an airfield in Berkshire, England, trucking in hundreds of tons of sand and constructing trenches, bunkers, and drop-ship rigs on gimbals. Rain machines poured water for 12 straight hours. The mud became so deep that cameras sank. The crew wore waders. Actors wore exhaustion. Helicopters hovered so low that prop washed blue props into the sea. Liman insisted on practical explosions, so the pyrotechnic team detonated charges within meters of the actors. Safety officers reportedly pleaded for restraint, but Liman wanted the chaos to feel uncontrolled. When you watch that sequence, the grain of the sky, the churned mud, the frantic camera, you're watching real confusion orchestrated into art. Tom Cruise, infamous for his physical discipline, refused body doubles for nearly every stunt. He learned to roll, dive, reload, and sprint under the weight of his exosuit until every movement looked instinctive. He even volunteered to be flung by hydraulic cables through explosions to mimic alien impacts. Emily Blunt, trained by ex-Special Forces coaches, became so proficient with the giant sword she wielded, a weapon inspired by a helicopter blade, that she could spin it without looking. She named it the bus stop because, as she joked, every time I hit someone, it felt like waiting forever for impact. The discipline paid off. Their movements have the rhythm of dancers performing under gravity that refuses to forgive. One of the most remarkable production choices was Liman's insistence on shooting sequentially whenever possible. Hollywood rarely does that. It's expensive, but Liman wanted his actors to feel the fatigue accumulate. Scenes filmed at dawn were often followed by night shoots, with almost no break, to simulate the disorientation of looping days. Crews reportedly kept a journal marking every fictional death, and the crew teased them for it until they realized it helped continuity. The journal tracked emotional tone as well as plot. "We were all living the loop," Blunt later said, and Tom was our historian. Cinematographer Dion Beebe approached the film as if he were shooting two realities: the chaotic nightmare combat and the sterile repetition of the resets. He used handheld cameras for battles, then switched to Steadicam for each awakening, creating a visual rhythm that felt like the mind rebooting. The contrast between the rough beach textures and the clean training sequences gives the viewer subconscious relief. Chaos followed by control, control followed by chaos. Beebe's lighting design shifted imperceptibly with every loop. Sometimes dawn was cooler, sometimes warmer, giving subtle hints of time's elasticity. Doug Liman's reputation for unpredictability meant every day on set felt like an experiment. He shot scenes without storyboards, often rewriting dialogue minutes before takes. Editors later joked that they received enough footage to cut 3 different movies, one comedic, one tragic, one romantic. Liman encouraged that ambiguity. His mantra was find truth in repetition. And he would push actors to play the same line differently across takes until something spontaneous emerged. That's why the loops never feel identical. Each carries microscopic emotional shifts, as if the film itself were learning. The sound design was equally obsessive. Instead of the usual metallic clangs associated with sci-fi armor, designers created a hybrid palette. Recordings of subway doors slamming, machine presses, even a hiss of industrial coffee makers slowed down. The exosuit's hum became a character, a reminder of the mechanical shell imprisoning flesh. For the mimics, Liman wanted an otherworldly frequency, not an animal roar, but vibration that unsettled the body. The team recorded electrical arcs, reversed thunderclaps, and underwater sonic booms, blending them until they produced what one technician called the sound of panic given shape. When you hear that shriek, you feel it in your ribs, not your ears. Perhaps the strangest and most beautiful production anecdote concerns a farmhouse scene. It was filmed on a deliberately unstable set rigged with hydraulic floors. Liman wanted the creaks and shifts to be real, forcing the actors to adjust their balance mid-dialogue. He believed emotional tension grows from physical instability. Emily Blunt later said that by the 10th take, she didn't know whether trembling was acting or adrenaline. That uncertainty, Liman said, was the point, because they're both pretending to be calm in a collapsing world. Editing took nearly a year. Doug Liman and editor James Herbert locked themselves in studio, surrounded by whiteboards mapping every loop. They treated the timeline like a maze, trimming frames until cause and effect felt intuitive. Test audiences initially complained that they lost track of what was happening. The editors realized confusion was part of the experience, but had to sculpt it precisely, so it remained thrilling, not frustrating. The first 20 minutes are chaos, Liman explained, but chaos with intention. By the time the final cut emerged, more than 120 minutes of footage had been removed. Entire subplots about military politics, alternate deaths, and flashbacks. What remained was lean, kinetic storytelling built entirely on rhythm. The musical score by Christoph Beck avoided the grand orchestral cliches of war films. Instead, it used rhythmic pulses and distorted brass, sounds that repeat and mutate, echoing the loop motif. In early draft of the score, Beck included a literal ticking clock. Liman removed it, saying, "Time is a rhythm, not the percussion." You can feel that philosophy in the music's heartbeat-like pacing, crescendos that almost reset mid-bar, melodies that restart before completion. It's as if even the soundtrack is trapped in the loop. The production nearly collapsed twice. Budget overruns reached tens of millions due to weather and reshoots. Warner Brothers executives grew nervous, but Cruise personally assured them he'd finish on schedule. He reportedly worked 16-hour days, rewriting scenes with Liman at midnight, filming at dawn, reviewing footage at lunch. Emily Blunt once described him as the calmest man in chaos. That calm was contagious. Despite exhaustion, the crew began to believe they were building something unique. Liman later said that the film's energy came from 1,000 small near failures that miraculously aligned. When it finally premiered, those months of pain translated into precision. Every grain of sand, every explosion, every breath of fatigue feels earned. What fascinates me most is how the behind-the-scenes process unconsciously mirrored the film's message. Mistakes, corrections, repetition until perfection. The set was its own loop, frustration birthing improvement, exhaustion giving way to excellence. The actors weren't just performing resilience, they were living it. There's an unspoken poetry in knowing that this technically complex film, born from disorder and second-guessing, became a study in mastery. Doug Liman, when asked years later what he learned from the experience, said that sometimes you have to relive the same day until you find the truth in it. He might have been talking about directing, but he could just as easily have been describing life itself. The setting of Edge of Tomorrow feels less like a location and more like an atmosphere, an exhausted planet at the edge of surrender. The entire world is drenched in the cold light of inevitability. Europe, reimagined as a battlefield swallowed by alien occupation, becomes a mirror of human decay, modern yet medieval, filled with drones and exosuits, but spiritually no different from the trenches of World War I. Doug Liman and his team didn't want polished sci-fi surfaces. They wanted texture, corrosion, and fatigue. The color palette bleeds gray, rust, and the blue glow of alien intrusion. Even the sky feels infected, the clouds heavy with dread. Watching it, you can almost smell the metal and mud. A war without romanticism, without glory. The beach at Verdun, which anchors the film's most iconic sequences, is not just a battlefield. It's a graveyard caught in a time loop. It evokes Normandy, Gallipoli, Dunkirk, the recurring trauma of mankind replaying its own destruction. Everything about it is tactile. The crushed sand sticking to exosuits, the mechanical shrieks of dropships diving into chaos, the unrelenting rhythm of waves devouring corpses. There's something deeply symbolic in the way the sea keeps reclaiming the battlefield, nature quietly mocking the arrogance of machines. The camera never treats the beach as spectacle. It moves like a journalist amid hysteria, shaky, gasping, finding brief glimpses of humanity in the carnage. The editing cuts like memory fragments, moments too fast to understand but impossible to forget. Every reset drags us back to that same gray shore, and each time it feels slightly different, as though the earth itself remembers the pain. Contrast that with the training facility, sterile, symmetrical, bathed in fluorescent monotony. It's here that the loop transforms from chaos into discipline. The harsh light reflects off the steel walls, erasing warmth. The repetition of drills and deaths feels surgical, almost religious. Every thud of metal against mat, every gun discharge, becomes a metronome marking time's imprisonment. The production design deliberately drains color from these sequences, trapping us in an industrial purgatory. When Rita kills Cage again and again, it's not cruelty, it's purification. The entire aesthetic screams of cold order versus natural entropy. And then there's the farmhouse, perhaps the most human setting in the entire movie. A cracked window, dust swirling through light, rain echoing on the roof, a fragile oasis in an endless storm. It's the first time the palette softens. Warm tones return, amber lamps, faded wood, gentle blue shadows. The silence here is shocking after all that metal and chaos. It's where the film allows intimacy to breathe. You can hear the creak of the floorboards, the drip of a leaky pipe, the quiet conversation that never finds completion. The farmhouse becomes the emotional center of the story, a glimpse of the life they'll never have, a memory of tranquility that keeps resetting into extinction. The cinematography lingers on reflections, small gestures, the brush of hands. It's not just a change of location. It's a temporary escape from the machinery of fate. When the film moves to Paris in the final act, the tone shifts again. The city, drowned dark, almost mythic, feels like the world's subconscious. Monuments that once symbolized civilization are now submerged beneath alien vines and stagnant water. The Eiffel Tower's wreckage leans against the Louvre like a broken cross, turning beauty into ruin. Dion Beebe lights these scenes with a painter's precision, deep shadows pierced by bioluminescent blue, as if humanity's history is glowing faintly beneath extinction. The use of natural rain and reflective puddles gives everything a ghostly sheen, blending the human and the alien into one dying organism. You can feel the weight of centuries collapsing. Paris isn't just a backdrop. It's a requiem for time. What's extraordinary about the film's visual rhythm is how it uses repetition without monotony. Each return to the same setting brings microscopic visual evolution. The lighting angles change, the smoke density shifts, the lens distance narrows. We experience the world the way Cage does, familiar, yet increasingly warped by memory. The cinematography teaches us how repetition transforms perception. The first beach landing feels overwhelming, the second clinical, the fifth almost serene. By the 10th, we stop seeing war and start seeing choreography, humans and aliens performing a dance of inevitability. That metamorphosis is the genius of Doug Liman's visual storytelling. He doesn't change the scenery, he changes our relationship to it. The color theory behind the film deserves its own meditation. At first glance, everything looks washed out, almost monochrome, but that's deceptive. The production team built a subtle gradient that mirrors Cage's moral progression. Early sequences lean towards cold grays and blues, confusion, fear, detachment. Midway, as Cage grows in mastery, the palette shifts toward steel silver and faint amber, control and awareness. In the final act, Paris glows in sickly blue and faint gold, transcendence through decay. Even the smallest details follow this logic. The hue of explosions, the reflection in visors, the saturation of the ocean foam. It's a symphony of fatigue turning into clarity. Sound becomes an invisible setting of its own. The film's sonic environment traps you in a loop as much as the story does. Every reset begins with the same auditory cues: the roar of engines, Pharaoh's barked orders, the clink of chains. But listen closely, and each loop sounds slightly different. The distance of the voices changes. The background hum rises or fades. The echo sharpens. These alterations, almost imperceptible, create a psychological sensation of déjà vu. Christoph Beck's score rarely announces itself. It creeps in like memory, building tension not through melody but through pulse. Percussive motifs, short, clipped, insistent, mimic the feeling of muscles tightening for battle. Occasionally, silence intrudes, and that silence feels louder than any explosion. Camera movement also tells its own story. Liman and Beebe chose to shoot handheld during most of the beach scenes to trap the audience inside the loop's chaos. Then, during the resets, they switched to smooth, steady compositions, life restarting under invisible control. When Cage gains mastery, the camera steadies with him. When he falters, it trembles again. It's choreography between man and lens, psychology translated into movement. Even the lens choices evolve, from wide angles at the beginning to emphasize disorientation, to tighter frames later to highlight focus and intimacy. By the end, when he faces the Omega underwater, the camera feels almost still, like the world has finally stopped spinning. Lighting plays another narrative role. Notice how every environment carries its own philosophy of illumination. The camp scenes glow with harsh industrial whites. Truth stripped of comfort. The beach is lit by chaos, explosions and clouds muting sunlight into gray despair. The farmhouse radiates soft yellows, false safety. Paris glows with phosphorescent blue, the illumination of revelation. Light in this film is a metaphor for awareness. Every hue corresponds to a state of consciousness: ignorance, understanding, acceptance, transcendence. Even costume design participates in the storytelling. The exosuits evolve subtly as the movie progresses. Early on, they look bulky and awkward, emphasizing Cage's incompetence. Later, they appear sleeker, their metal more reflective, the illusion of control. Rita's armor, scarred and painted with streaks of white, symbolizes ritual purification through battle. Her sword, made from a helicopter blade, reflects both practicality and poetry, the transformation of destruction into precision. Off the battlefield, their civilian clothes look deliberately drab, drained of individuality, as though personality has no place in survival. Production designers also embedded hidden loops throughout the set design. Posters, graffiti, even background monitors repeat the same warnings and slogans across different locations. Humanity prevails, fight, win, repeat. Each reappearance reinforces the illusion that the world itself is looping, not just Cage's consciousness. There's even a subtle visual echo between scenes. A cracked mirror in the barracks mirrors a shattered window in the farmhouse, and finally, the broken glass above the Omega's lair. Time's fracture replicated through architecture. The editing deserves praise as a visual instrument. Instead of jump cuts, the editors often use match cuts, the same gesture repeated across different loops. Cage's hand falling on the ground transitions into another morning. His eyes closing before death dissolve into awakening. It's a cinematic heartbeat. Death exhale, rebirth inhale. The repetition feels organic, like breathing through the nightmare. What makes a setting in cinematography so haunting is their quiet refusal to let the viewer escape. Even the beauty of the film is heavy. There's no clean air, no untarnished horizon. The world feels suffocating, as though time itself is oxidized. Yet within that decay lies grace. Every puddle reflects not despair, but perseverance. Every shaft of light cutting through smoke feels like a promise that even repetition cannot dull wonder. By the end, the settings, the beach, the camp, the farmhouse, the drowned city, become mental landscapes more than physical places. They represent the stages of soul: ignorance, discipline, intimacy, transcendence. The loop isn't just temporal, it's geographical. Cage travels across states of being, and the film spaces carry him like a pilgrim moving through sacred ruins. Watching it again, you realize that the movie never cared about futuristic warfare. It cared about the architecture of endurance. The world may burn and reset, but within the ashes, beauty remains mechanical, exhausted, luminous. Behind every frame of Edge of Tomorrow lies a story of persistence that almost mirrors the film's own plot. It's fitting that a movie about repetition, failure, and learning was made through exactly those same experiences. Doug Liman's set became a living organism, restless, unpredictable, looping through revisions, mistakes, and miracles until every scene finally aligned. Crew members used a joke that they didn't work on Edge of Tomorrow. They survived it. The irony was that they were trapped in a kind of creative time loop themselves, reliving the same shots until perfection emerged from exhaustion. Liman's directing style has always flirted with chaos, but on this project he took it to new extremes. He's notorious for shooting without fixed storyboards, preferring to discover scenes rather than plan them. The crew never knew what the day's focus would be until dawn. He would walk onto the muddy Berkshire airfield set, squint at the light, and suddenly declare that everything had to be shot from a different angle. The cinematographer Dion Beebe described him as a man chasing lightning with a butterfly net. Yet, somehow, that lightning kept striking in exactly the right places. Each day's improvisation forced the actors to stay alert, alive, and authentic. Nothing felt rehearsed, even though it was 1,000th take. One of the most haunting behind-the-scenes details is how the physical burden of the exosuits turned into a unifying ordeal. Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt had to perform inside those 100-pound mechanical skeletons under rain machines and live pyrotechnics. Cruise would start each morning doing sprints in full armor, while Emily practiced sword drills until her palms blistered. Between takes, they couldn't sit, so assistants built small rigs with bicycle seats hanging from cranes to let them rest while suspended. Crew members called them mecha swings. The sound of metal groaning mixed with laughter became the soundtrack of the set. What amazes me is that the exhaustion you see in their faces isn't acting. It's documentary truth captured in fiction. Doug Liman's relationship with Tom Cruise was unlike any director-actor pairing in Hollywood. Cruise, meticulous and methodical, met Liman, impulsive and chaotic, and the result was creative combustion. They argued, negotiated, and inspired each other daily. Cruise demanded endless takes. Liman demanded surprise. There's a famous story where Liman asked for a completely new scene at sunset, even though they'd already wrapped for the day. Cruise glanced at the light, calculated the minutes left, and said, "We can get 2 good runs." Within half an hour, they had captured one of the movie's most intimate shots. Cage watching Rita in silence, unsure if it's love or fatigue. It was unscripted, born from instinct, and it ended up anchoring the film's emotional weight. Emily Blunt, on the other hand, brought calm ferocity to the chaos. Liman called her the compass. When schedules collapsed, she ground everyone with dry humor. Her training scenes required her to shoot Cruise in the head dozens of times per day, and the fake gunfire was so loud that she once lost partial hearing in one ear for a week. Yet she never broke character. Between takes, she stretched in silence, conserving energy like a soldier meditating before battle. The crew started calling her Full Metal Emily. She later said that playing Rita was the hardest role of her career, not because of the action, but because of the repetition. You can fake pain, but you can't fake fatigue. The crew endured its own repetition. Rain machines malfunctioned, vehicles sank into mud, electrical circuits blew during night shoots. Every failure forced adaptation. Liman famously said, "Every problem is a new take." When one of the massive dropship rigs jammed midair, trapping crews inside for an hour, He refused rescue until engineers solved the mechanism safely. He laughed about it later. Cage wouldn't quit the battlefield. I couldn't quit the crane. That stubborn professionalism infected everyone around him. Grip crews, lighting technicians, and costume assistants began keeping journals of what worked and what didn't, literally creating procedural manuals for surviving Liman's creative storm. By the end, they'd rewritten filmmaking protocol the same way Cage rewrote survival. Post-production became its own battlefield. Liman's editing team described the process as building a Rubik's Cube with melting pieces. They used color-coded timelines to track loops, deaths, and emotional arcs. Some sequences existed in 15 different variations. Liman insisted on reviewing every version himself, sometimes screening edits back-to-back until 3 a.m. He wanted to feel the rhythm in his bones. Editor James Herbert joked that the cutting room smelled like coffee, metal, and fear. The most difficult task was deciding how many times to show Cage's death before fatigue replaced empathy. Liman's instinct was musical. Each death a beat, each rebirth a pause, until the tempo felt right. When the pacing finally clicked, the crew applauded in the dark. They knew they had found the film's pulse. Even sound design went through its own reincarnations. The team layered real war recordings from Normandy veterans with manipulated industrial noises. One sound designer spent weeks recording malfunctioning generators to mimic alien roars. Another slowed down recordings of a tiger's growl and merged them with screeching train brakes. Liman wanted the alien attacks to feel like metal having nightmares. In the final mix, those sounds became physical sensations. Subwoofers vibrated theater seats so audiences could feel death approach before seeing it. During reshoots, which stretched months after initial completion, the cast affectionately referred to them as the afterlife. Crews returned from another film shoot just to redo a 2-minute scene because Liman felt the smile at the end needed less triumph, more peace. That subtle change transformed the movie's entire emotional tone. Crews later said it was one of the most satisfying creative collaborations of his life, precisely because it was unpredictable. Doug makes you earn every frame. The marketing team, meanwhile, had its own nightmare loop. The studio couldn't settle on a title that captured both intensity and intelligence. Test audiences reacted tepidly to Edge of Tomorrow, thinking it sounded generic. Live Die Repeat tested better, but felt too abstract. After release, when home video copies carried the tagline larger than the title, confusion turned into cult fascination. Liman later admitted he secretly loved the chaos. Even the marketing went through its own reset. The irony that the movie's success came only after its rebirth on Blu-ray wasn't lost on anyone. Perhaps the most intimate behind-the-scenes truth came from Dion Beebe, the cinematographer. He said that Liman's instruction for every shot was to find the fatigue in beauty. That phrase defined the entire aesthetic. The handheld chaos wasn't just style, it was empathy. The camera became participant in exhaustion, trembling with the soldiers, searching for grace amid debris. Beebe later recalled shooting one sunrise on the fake beach after a night of storms. The sky cleared suddenly, casting a pale orange glow over the soaked set. Crews looked around, whispered, "This is the first new morning I've seen in weeks," and Liman quietly rolled camera. That improvised shot ended up as one of the film's transitions between loops, a genuine sunrise for a story trapped in endless dawns. The production's greatest miracle is that despite all its improvisation and unpredictability, the film feels meticulously designed. The loop wasn't just narrative, it was method. Every mistake birthed refinement. Every exhaustion revealed truth. Watching it now, knowing how many times they had to start over, you realize that Edge of Tomorrow wasn't simply directed. It was endured. Doug Liman once said, half-jokingly, "We didn't shoot a movie about a time loop. We survived one." And that's the beauty of it. Art imitating struggle. Struggle transforming into art. Every great science fiction film carries within it the echo of human philosophy, and Edge of Tomorrow hides its depth behind the rhythm of explosions. Beneath the armor, the time loops, the alien spectacle, lies a meditation on life's most ancient struggle, the war between fate and will. The movie whispers a single question again and again. If you could live the same day repeatedly, would you become godlike or human? And the answer, softly, tragically, is both. At its heart, The story is about transformation through failure. The loop is not punishment, it's education. Each death is a lesson, each reset a confession. It's a visual sermon about how progress is born not from talent, but from error. The movie translates perseverance into muscle memory. That's why it resonates far beyond its genre. We recognize ourselves in Cage's exhaustion. We all live smaller versions of his loop. Waking up, promising to change, failing, and trying again. The beach becomes a metaphor for the everyday battlefield where we keep dying in tiny ways. To doubt, to fear, to repetition itself. Time in this world isn't linear. It's circular, like the rings inside a tree trunk, each loop adding another layer of experience. In that sense, the film borrows heavily from Eastern philosophy, especially the Buddhist idea of samsara, the endless cycle of rebirth driven by ignorance and desire. Cage begins as a soul trapped by ego, reborn until he understands humility and compassion. The moment he stops fighting to escape and instead acts selflessly, the loop dissolves, enlightenment disguised as action cinema. It's ironic that a movie so full of noise finds its peace in silence. When Cage stops screaming, the universe listens. There's also the shadow of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the challenge to live each moment as if you would relive it infinitely. The movie dares the audience to confront monotony not as torture, but as tests. Can you love life even when it refuses to change? Every reset forces Cage to re-choose morality. He could exploit the loop for pleasure, dominance, or cruelty, yet he chooses mastery and sacrifice. That repetition of choice is what shapes character. We are what we decide to be again and again, not once. Symbolically, the aliens, those writhing, luminous mimics, are time itself. They have no fixed shape, no linear logic, only endless motion. They represent the chaos of existence. Beautiful, terrifying, impossible to predict. The Omega, pulsing beneath the Louvre, isn't just a creature. It's the heart of inevitability, the nucleus of recurrence. Its destruction is not the triumph of humanity over aliens. It's consciousness reclaiming freedom from mechanical fate. When Cage dives toward it with grenades, it's as if he's confronting time itself. The leap from repetition into mortality. The color palette reinforces these themes. The grays and blues of the battlefield symbolize ignorance and fear. The warmer tones of the farmhouse in Paris signify fleeting clarity. Notice how the film never indulges in pure color. Every hue feels diluted, fatigued. It's as though the world itself is tired of being reborn. Only in the final moments, when the loop resets one last time, does natural daylight return, clean, gentle, forgiving. That light is symbolic redemption. The universe has finally exhaled. Death, too, becomes philosophical currency here. Most war films treat death as endpoint or spectacle. This one treats it as punctuation, necessary, rhythmic, intimate. The frequency of Cage's deaths forces us to reconsider what mortality means. When death loses finality, life gains awareness. Each death reminds him and us that meaning isn't found in permanence but in effort. Even the briefest victory matters if achieved with intention. There's something spiritual about how Liman frames each reset. The same camera angle, the same sound, yet the meaning shifts. It's reincarnation distilled into cinema grammar. Love, perhaps the quietest theme of all, hides beneath the gunfire. Cage's affection for Rita is never announced. It accumulates silently across lifetimes. The tragedy is that only he remembers it. Their connection becomes a film's emotional paradox. Love built on one-sided memory. It reflects our own human longing, the desire to be known completely, even when the world forgets. When he looks at her in the final scene, smiling through exhaustion, it's not triumph, it's grief wrapped in grace. He has lived enough to understand that love's value isn't in its duration, but in its sincerity. Another thread running through the story is the critique of heroism. Traditional war cinema glorifies sacrifice as spectacle. Edge of Tomorrow dismantles that myth. Cage begins as propaganda, the false face of bravery, and ends as embodiment of quiet duty. The film suggests that true heroism is not loud or photogenic. It's repetitive, disciplined, invisible. Rita's fame as the Angel of Verdun contrasts with her private despair. She knows victory is just another loop waiting to restart. Together they expose the hollowness of glory and replace it with something purer, purpose. There's also a layer of social commentary buried in the machinery. The exosuits symbolize humanity's obsession with enhancement, the belief that technology can redeem weakness. But inside them, soldiers still die the same way, screaming, afraid. The armor amplifies power but cannot erase vulnerability. Liman shoots these suits as coffins of steel, each one a reminder that progress without wisdom is still servitude. When Cage finally masters his armor, he stops relying on it emotionally. His real evolution is internal. The exosuit, once his prison, becomes his tool. It's the ultimate metaphor for modern existence. Technology surrounding frail flesh, promising control while demanding surrender. Repetition also serves as satire. The military hierarchy, the propaganda speeches, the motivational slogans plastered across walls, all loops of language meant to hypnotize society. Fight, win, repeat. Echoes through screens and posters like a corporate mantra, a parody of perseverance. It mocks the way institutions recycle hope to maintain obedience. In that sense, Cage's rebellion isn't just against aliens, but against systemic inertia, the machinery of authority that demands repetition without reflection. His awakening is political as much as spiritual. Even humor carries thematic weight. The early loops, filled with slapstick deaths and awkward failures, mirror our naive attempts at mastery in any field. We fall, we retry, we curse, we learn. Comedy becomes philosophy, pain rehearsed until wisdom appears. Liman's decision to inject humor into despair transforms a movie from tragedy into lesson. It reminds us that absurdity and resilience are inseparable twins. Water imagery flows throughout the film as a symbol of rebirth. The invasion begins on a beach, baptism by chaos. The farmhouse storm represents emotional cleansing. The final confrontation occurs underwater. Literal immersion into the source of time. Water is a loop's medium, reflecting both life and death. When Cage drowns the Omega, his rebirth is sealed through submersion. It's mythic, almost biblical. Jonah inside the whale of eternity. From another angle, the movie can be read as a metaphor for artistic creation. Cage's loop resembles a creative process. Draft, fail, revise, repeat. Rita becomes a muse who inspires excellence through discipline. Liman, in this interpretation, is both the Omega and the observer, orchestrating infinite attempts until meaning emerges. The repetition that defines the plot also defines art itself. To create anything worth keeping, one must endure countless restarts. Symbolically, the ending embodies a reconciliation of opposites. Cage, the man of control, embraces surrender. Rita, the woman of faith, finds peace and mortality. The loop's final reset isn't escape, but acceptance. The universe grants mercy only after humility is achieved. That last smile, that quiet sunrise, is not reward, it's release. Time has stopped punishing him because he no longer resists its lesson. What fascinates me is how all these themes converge into a single truth. Life is not linear advancement, but circular refinement. We do not climb, we spiral. Every mistake revisited, every heartbreak repeated, every day restarted brings us closer to understanding, not perfection. The loop is simply the form of human growth made visible. In that sense, Edge of Tomorrow isn't just science fiction. It's scripture written in bullets and mud. And perhaps the most beautiful symbolism of all is hidden in its alternate title. Live, die, repeat. Those three words are the entire philosophy of existence, stripped of ornament. They describe every heartbeat, every dream, every failure that leads to wisdom. To live is to risk, to die is to learn, to repeat is to continue becoming. What always astonishes me about Edge of Tomorrow is that it feels effortless when you watch it, yet every single moment of that effortlessness was built on obsessive craft. The filmmaking itself is a battlefield of precision. Rhythm, composition, sound, editing, and performance locked into a dance that somehow keeps chaos coherent. Beneath its pulse of explosions lies a level of directorial control that turns repetition into elegance. Doug Liman once said that the movie was edited like music, shot like documentary, and acted like theater, and that description, strange as it sounds, fits perfectly. Let's start with rhythm, because that's the skeleton of this film. Most blockbusters run on momentum. This one runs on cadence. Every cut, every sound cue, every loop is timed to mimic the human learning curve. The first act stumbles and stutters, long takes, jagged edits, unsteady camera work that traps the audience in disorientation. Then gradually, as Cage adapts, the tempo accelerates. Cuts shorten, transitions snap cleanly, and the film begins to breathe in sync with him. Editing becomes storytelling. You can feel his competence growing not through dialogue, but through time itself tightening. By the midpoint, the montage structure turns hypnotic. Deaths occur in rhythmic intervals. Repetition becomes choreography. It's filmmaking as evolution, the grammar of cinema learning with its protagonist. James Herbert's editing deserves far more credit than it gets. He layered continuity and discontinuity, like musical motifs. Each loop is slightly shorter than the last, trimming the fat the way memory does. That's why the film never feels redundant, even though it repeats scenes dozens of times. The rhythm tricks the mind into perceiving growth within sameness, the same magic musicians use when repeating chords and crescendo. If you listen closely to the sound bridge between loops, you'll hear micro variations in pitch and timing that make every repetition feel earned. It's unconscious but powerful. Dion Beebe's cinematography complements that editing philosophy with surgical intention. He approached light and lens as emotional states, not aesthetics. Early sequences are lit with flat, overcast gray, the absence of clarity. As Cage begins to learn, contrast deepens. Shadows sharpen around him, suggesting focus. By the final act, Beebe floods Paris with near-religious chiaroscuro, darkness pierced by blue luminescence, like enlightenment cutting through despair. Beebe used natural light whenever possible, letting weather dictate texture. Some of the most breathtaking frames were accidents. Sunlight breaking through storm clouds at the exact moment crews looked up. Liman kept those takes, calling them gifts in the loop. Camera movement is equally symbolic. The handheld turbulence of the first speech assault mirrors confusion. The Steadicam calm of later sequences mirrors mastery. Liman avoided crane shots except for the final approach to the Louvre, where he wanted the camera to float, a spiritual detachment. The result is progression from documentary chaos to dreamlike grace. He even switched lenses as the film advanced. Wide angles early, mids later, long lenses in the finale. The subtle narrowing of field mirrors cages psychological focus, pulling the viewer closer to the interstate until final scene feels almost intimate. Sound design, though often invisible to viewers, is the movie's heartbeat. The mixers create an aural loop system. Each reset begins with a specific triad of noises: the whine of a dropship turbine, feral southern drawl, the metallic click of a restraint. These auditory cues condition the audience like Pavlovian memory. The mind anticipates chaos before it appears, creating tension through expectation rather than surprise. Liman described it as audio deja vu. The explosions themselves were engineered from multi-layered elements. Cannon fire blended with whale song, jet engines pitched down to inhuman frequencies. The mimic screeches made from reverse recordings of tearing metal and insect wings carry a biological unease that bypasses language. You don't just hear them, your stomach reacts. Christoph Beck's musical score is one of the most understated masterstrokes of the film. He avoided grand orchestral cues in favor of rhythmic pulses, percussion that loops and mutates like time itself. Motifs begin confidently, then collapse halfway, restarting in new tempos. The main theme isn't melody but momentum, a repeating four-note sequence that mimics the sound of breath quickening under stress. Beck described it as the sound of trying again. Even silence is weaponized. Entire stretches drop the music altogether, letting mechanical noise fill the void. That contrast between silence and rhythm becomes emotional punctuation, guiding the viewer's heartbeat. The production design, led by Oliver Scholl, grounds the impossible in tactile realism. Every surface looks used, scratched, lived in. The United Defense Forces barracks combine modern architecture with remnants of 20th century military design, a visual metaphor for humanity, repeating its mistakes under futuristic skin. The exosuits, built from aluminum and carbon fiber rather than CGI, give weight to every movement. You can feel gravity in the way actors stumble and strain. Scholl's color palette leans toward desaturation: green, gray steel, ochre sand, dull orange sparks. Nothing gleams because nothing is new. The world has been at war too long. Even screens and holograms flicker with static, suggesting technology fraying under exhaustion. Costume designer Kate Hawley extended that philosophy to uniforms that degrade subtly across loops. Early on, Cage's armor is spotless. By mid-film, scratches and grime accumulate even though the day technically resets. Liman approved the continuity error intentionally. He wanted visual memory to remain, as if the universe itself was tired of resetting. Rita's sword, cut from a broken helicopter blade, represents industrial rebirth. Destruction turned into discipline. The costume department coated it with matte finish instead of shine, letting it absorb light like history. Liman's direction thrives on paradox, meticulous chaos. He encouraged improvisation within rigid structure. For example, he told crews to vary his line delivery each loop by one emotional degree, 10% more fatigue, 10% less fear, then filmed those micro differences with identical setups. Later, Herbert layered those takes into montages, so the viewer subconsciously senses growth without noticing the cut. It's a masterclass in invisible direction, control masquerading as spontaneity. One of Liman's boldest choices was to shoot many action scenes with real IMAX cameras mounted on the suits themselves. The result is kinetic intimacy. Every explosion feels personal because the perspective comes from the character's chest or helmet. The vibrations distort edges, creating a semi-subjective blur that communicates panic more truthfully than any visual effects filter could. Beebe embraced that distortion, treating lens flare and camera shake not as flaws but as emotional language. Lighting played psychological games as well. In the barrack scenes, fluorescents flicker in repetitive rhythm, almost like a metronome ticking with a loop. On the beach, explosions double as light sources, giving every death its own brief illumination. Liman described it poetically. Every time he dies, the world flashes like a bulb before memory fades. That choice turns death into exposure, literal enlightenment through pain. The visual effects team at Framestore and Sony ImageWorks spent months refining the mimic's movement. Instead of motion capture, they used procedural animation driven by chaos algorithms. The result is unpredictability. No two tentacle strikes ever repeat exactly. That randomness makes the aliens feel like time incarnate, fluid, untamable. The compositing work is nearly invisible because Liman preferred to dirty every frame with real debris and practical dust, blending CGI and live action until boundaries vanished. All these elements converge into one aesthetic: exhaustion rendered beautiful. It's rare to see blockbuster filmmaking where every department serves a philosophical theme. Liman insisted that form and meaning remain inseparable. The technique must echo the lesson, so repetition became principle. Shots were res-hot dozens of times, not just for perfection, but for authenticity of repetition itself. The film became a self-portrait of its creation. Now, when discussing filmmaking techniques, we must also speak of performance rhythm, how acting interacts with camera. Cruise, known for intensity, modulated himself into subtlety here. His performance is built on micro-timing. Watch his eyes during resets, the half-second hesitation before realization strikes, the control breath before panic returns. Liman filmed multiple versions of each awakening, later assembling them like musical phrases. It's acting edited as composition. Emily Blunt counterbalances him with economy. Her movements are mathematical, her stillness deliberate. Their dynamic is cinematic geometry, motion meeting stillness, chaos orbiting calm. The dialogue writing also deserves notice for its repetition economy. Screenwriters Christopher McQuarrie, Jez Butterworth, and John Henry Butterworth strip language to rhythm. Lines like, "Come find me when you wake up" function as refrains. Repetition in speech becomes mantra, spiritual, hypnotic. By the end, familiar lines trigger emotion rather than exposition. It's proof that great dialogue doesn't explain, it resonates. Technically, the film also innovated editing flow for complex action. Traditional continuity editing fails when scenes repeat. You risk disorienting viewers. Herbert solved it through associative montage, cutting on emotional recognition rather than geography. The viewer feels connection through rhythm instead of logic. That's why transitions never confuse despite constant resets. They follow empathy, not space. On the box office front, the film's release mirrored its narrative irony, with a production budget hovering around $175 million and marketing that struggled to convey its premise. Opening weekend numbers in the U.S. were modest, roughly $28 million. Analysts declared it a disappointment. Yet, like Cage himself, the movie refused to die. Overseas audiences, particularly in Japan and Europe, embraced its blend of intellect and spectacle. Word of mouth spread. Repeat viewings, ironically, became common. By the end of its theatrical run, it had grossed nearly $370 million worldwide. Respectable, but not yet legendary. Then came its resurrection. When the home release campaign rebranded it with the tagline "Live, Die, Repeat," sales skyrocketed. Streaming audiences discovered what theaters had overlooked, a blockbuster that rewarded attention. Over the following years, its reputation looped upward. Critics revised their earlier takes. Scholars dissected its structure, and filmmakers cited it as blueprint. Even box office analysts admitted the film's financial arc resembled its narrative. Underperform, reset, succeed. Its later profits from home media and licensing pushed cumulative revenue above $500 million, quietly transforming it into one of Warner Brothers' most valuable long-term properties. Plans for a sequel, tentatively titled Live, Die, Repeat, and Repeat, circulated for years. Liman and Cruise both expressed interest but refused to rush it. "We'll only make it if we can break time again," Liman joked. Development stalls, rewrites, and restarts turned the sequel itself into another loop. Fitting destiny for a story about perpetual beginnings. Whether it ever materializes almost doesn't matter. The first film already achieved narrative closure rare for Hollywood. It ended precisely where meaning peaks. From a legacy perspective, the movie altered how mainstream studios perceive complexity. It proved that audiences could handle nonlinear repetition if rhythm replaced exposition. Its techniques influenced later works like Source Code, Palm Springs, and even Russian Doll, all of which borrowed its pacing grammar. The film's mixture of realism and futurism set new visual benchmarks for grounded sci-fi. You can trace its tactile aesthetic in later hits like The Tomorrow War and Extraction. Soldiers drench in mud instead of neon. Academically, film schools began studying its editing model as a case study in temporal compression. The British Film Institute cited it as a rare blockbuster that teaches narrative economy through rhythm rather than dialogue. Directors praised its humility, the willingness to sacrifice spectacle for clarity. Liman's approach reframed what a summer action film could be. Not louder, but smarter. Perhaps the most touching postscript came from a crew years later. In interviews marking the film's 10th anniversary, they confessed that shooting it changed how they approached life. Assistant directors said they became calmer under pressure, costume teams more patient with repetition. Liman called it his proudest achievement. "We didn't just make a movie about resilience, we practiced it." So, when I think about it tomorrow in terms of filmmaking, I see it as a symphony of control disguised as chaos. Every technical decision, lens choice, edit rhythm, sound texture, light temperature, whispers the same mantra. Learn through doing, doing through failing, failing until meaning appears. The film's success, financial and artistic, wasn't accidental. It was a reward for relentless iteration. In the end, the genius of its craft lies in how invisibly it works. You don't watch the technique. You feel its consequence. The loop becomes seamless, the machinery invisible, the structure natural. That's true mastery. When perfection hides behind fatigue, when art feels alive because it has suffered. Edge of Tomorrow achieved that rare state where filmmaking technique and narrative philosophy become one continuous heartbeat. Live, die, repeat, until even the audience forgets where the loop began and simply feels the rhythm of becoming. There's something unusually intimate about hearing actors talk about a film that nearly broke their bodies and, somehow, became one of the most beloved science fiction stories of the decade. The cast of Edge of Tomorrow didn't simply perform endurance, they lived it. Physically and emotionally, day after day, loop after loop. When you read or watch their interviews now, years later, there's an unmistakable tone of pride mixed with disbelief. They all describe the experience the same way. It was brutal, chaotic, and utterly transformative. Tom Cruise, of course, is the gravitational center around which everything revolved. In interviews, he often smiles that practice smile of gratitude, but when Edge of Tomorrow comes up, his expression changes. It softens, almost humbled. "It was the most demanding shoot of my life," he admitted once, which, coming from a man who hangs off airplanes for fun, means something. He talked about the exosuit as if it were a living thing. "At first, it controlled me. By the end, I controlled it." That's the character arc right there. He remembered how his first week in armor left bruises down his spine. He spent nights studying footage of himself just to figure out how to move more efficiently inside the machine. "It was choreography," he said, "not acting. The emotions had to travel through 80 pounds of metal." Cruise also spoke candidly about his fascination with the theme of repetition. "I love the idea of failure being progress," he told Empire. "In my life, I've always believed you have to crash to learn. This movie literalized that." He approached each take like a separate lifetime. Between scenes, he would analyze how Cage would evolve psychologically by his 100th death. Slower breath, quieter movements, fewer words. That attention to rhythm is why his performance feels musical. Doug used to say, "Don't play the loop, play the lesson," Cruise recalled. It took me a while to understand what that meant. Emily Blunt's reflections reveal a very different kind of endurance, quieter, more introspective, and somehow fiercer. She often jokes about the suit, but speaks of Rita with a kind of reverence. "Rita is pure will," she once said. "She's not fearless. She's exhausted. That's the difference. Blunt prepared months before filming, training in weightlifting and Krav Maga, but she admitted that nothing could prepare her for mental repetition. We'd shoot the same moment 15 times from different angles, every day. You start to feel like you're actually trapped in that loop. It's strange. You stop remembering which take is which. It blurs, like memories of deja vu. In a Vanity Fair interview, she revealed that the famous training scene, the one where she mercilessly shoots Cruz mid-sentence, was shot over 2 weeks. I lost count of how many times I pulled that trigger, she laughed. Every time he'd add a new little flinch or scream, and I'd have to suppress a smile. She said that was a charm working with him. He treated every repetition as fresh, as if the story itself demanded honesty no matter how many times they'd done it. It's rare to work with someone so unembarrassed by vulnerability, she said. He plays fear beautifully. Off camera, their relationship developed into what both described as soldiers' camaraderie. They teased each other constantly. Cruz once filled her exosuit helmet with paper confetti on her birthday, and she retaliated by hiding coffee beans in his boots. But beneath the humor was real respect. In press junkets, they finished each other's sentences, joking about bruises as if recounting battlefield scars. Tom's energy is nuclear, Blunt said. He'd show up at 4 a.m. with this glow, ready to run 20 miles. I just glare at him and say, stop smiling until I've had coffee. Bill Paxton, who played Sergeant Farrell, was another heartbeat of film, his southern drawl and theatrical bravado giving comic relief to the relentless tension. In interviews before his passing, Paxton spoke fondly about how Cruz personally invited him to join the cast. He said, we need someone who can scare me and make people laugh at the same time. How could I say no? Paxton described the shoot as boot camp for lunatics. He admired Liman's unpredictability. Doug kept us all honest. If you didn't know what the hell was happening, good. Neither did your character. His portrayal of Farrell, part preacher and part drill sergeant, was largely improvised. He said the line, battle is the great redeemer, came to him while standing in mud at 3 a.m., shivering. It just felt like something the guy would say to feel righteous while marching kids to their deaths. Brendan Gleeson, who played General Brigham, approached his role with quiet authority. In one interview, he said, I treated the general like a bureaucrat who believes in destiny because paperwork demands it. Gleeson's scenes were filmed late in the schedule, when everyone was exhausted. You could smell fatigue, he joked. It actually helped. Brigham's calm comes from watching too many soldiers burn out. Director Doug Liman's interviews are chaotic poetry. He rarely speaks in neat sound bites. His sentences loop like his movies. He described Cruz as a machine of empathy and Blunt as a human scalpel. He admitted to rewriting scenes during lunch breaks, filming with unfinished scripts, and inventing transitions in the editing room. People think I'm disorganized, he told Collider. But really, I just like being surprised. He believed that the unpredictability of the shoot mirrored the film's message. You can't plan your way out of chaos. You have to live your way through it. When Edge of Tomorrow premiered in 2014, the cast traveled together for its press tour, and audiences could sense their camaraderie. Cruz and Blunt appeared on red carpets, joking about the weight of their armor. Blunt even might challenge him to a push-up contest on live TV. Reviewers noticed their dynamic, professional, witty, almost sibling-like. They radiated mutual respect rather than manufactured chemistry, which is perhaps why their on-screen connection feels so authentic. Audience reactions were fascinatingly layered. Early viewers praised his intelligence, but it was word of mouth that turned it into a cult phenomenon. Fans loved the humor hidden inside despair. Online discussions flourished with people sharing how the film spoke to their own cycles of failure and growth. It's the best metaphor for learning a skill I've ever seen. One Reddit user wrote, every mistake you make in life is just a reset. Another said, I watched it during a hard time in my life, and it made me realize it's okay to keep starting over. That emotional connection gave the film a longevity no marketing campaign could have engineered. On Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, reviews climbed steadily over the years as new audiences discovered it. Many praised Emily Blunt's portrayal as a game changer for women in action cinema. One fan wrote, she made strength look like serenity. Others highlighted Cruz's humility in playing a coward first, something few superstars of his caliber dared to do. Film critics who had once dismissed the movie revisited it, admitting they'd underestimated it. It's not about spectacle, wrote one Guardian reviewer years later. It's about perseverance disguised as popcorn. In Japan, where the original novel originated, audiences embraced the adaptation warmly. Sakurazaka, the author, praised the changes, saying, they turned my dark philosophy into a more hopeful one, but the spirit remains. He was touched by how Western viewers connected to an idea so rooted in Eastern fatalism. The film's Japanese Blu-ray edition included a special commentary by him, where he observed that watching Cruz relive death after death felt oddly like reading one's own diary translated into another language. Among younger audiences, the film found a second life online. TikTok edits paired its battle sequences with motivational speeches. YouTube essays dissected its editing rhythm. Gamers cited it as a cinematic version of their save and retry culture. The film became shorthand for persistence. Even meme culture embraced it. Live, die, repeat. Turned into a punchline for everything from job hunting to dieting, a phrase both funny and profound. The chemistry between Cruz and Blunt remained a favorite topic. When asked years later about a possible sequel, Blunt sighed with half-serious dread. Tom keeps texting me about it, she said on a podcast. I told him, only if those suits weigh less than 10 pounds this time. Cruz laughed when told her comment. She's tougher than she admits. She could outshoot me any day. Their mutual teasing made fans nostalgic for a reunion that may never come. What makes the cast relationship with this movie special is that none of them expected it to age this well. In a 2022 reunion interview, Blunt said, it's the one I get stopped for the most. People don't just say they liked it. They tell me it changed how they see failure. That's rare for an action film. Cruz echoed her sentiment. We made a movie about dying and getting back up, and somehow it keeps getting back up too. Audience retrospectives often highlight how the film's emotional undercurrents sneak up on you. Viewers come for the concept, stay for the humanity. Many said they found themselves unexpectedly moved by the final scene. That faint smile, that unspoken acknowledgement of all the lives lived and lost. It's the smile of someone who's finally free, one reviewer wrote. I cried not because he won, but because he understood. Even the crew joined that reflection. Cinematographer Dion Beebe said fans still write to him about how the movie helped them through grief or burnout. They see themselves in a loop, he said. Everyone's fighting something invisible, waking up to the same fears every day. Liman added that he never expected it to become a therapy movie, but he was proud it did. If a blockbuster can remind people to keep trying, he said, then we did our job. Perhaps the most moving audience response came during a charity screening for veterans in London. Many soldiers approached the cast afterward, saying the repetition of combat felt eerily accurate. You wake up, train, lose people, repeat, one of them told Blunt. The movie understands the fatigue. She said it was the most emotional feedback she'd ever received. That night, she wrote in her journal, even war stories can teach grace. In retrospect, the cast interviews form their own loop. Stories of exhaustion, laughter, pain, and pride repeating across years, each retelling softer, wiser. They speak about the experience now the way soldiers recall old battles, with affection, disbelief, and a touch of reverence. We went through hell, Blunt said with a smile, but it was the kind of hell that makes you grateful. The audiences who still revisit it every year, quoting lines and dissecting frames, have kept that gratitude alive. What began as a midsummer release has evolved into a quiet, cult ritual. People rewatching, rediscovering, relearning. Each viewing feels like another reset, another chance to see something new. And maybe that's the truest measure of the film's success. It continues to live, die, and repeat in the hearts of those who love it. When I think back on Edge of Tomorrow, what lingers isn't explosions or even spectacle, it's loops. It's the pulse underneath, the human ache wrapped inside machinery. Every time I revisit it, I'm struck by how something so relentlessly mechanical, exercits, algorithms, time cycles, can feel so tender, so oddly spiritual. It's a movie about dying hundreds of times, yet it makes you feel alive by the end. Perhaps that's its greatest irony, a story about repetition that somehow feels fresh every single time you return to it. If you trace its rhythm carefully, the entire film feels like a metaphor for life itself. We wake up, stumble through chaos, try, fail, learn, and wake again. Each sunrise feels familiar, each mistake recycled, each small victory fragile. And yet we keep going. The brilliance of Doug Liman's direction lies in how he turns that exhaustion into exhilaration. He makes repetition feel like discovery, pain like progress. Watching Tom Cruise's Cage transform from coward to quiet savior, you realize that the movie isn't asking whether change is possible. It's proving that it's inevitable if you keep enduring long enough. What fascinates me is how the story never lies to us. It doesn't pretend that perseverance guarantees happiness. It promises only awareness. By the end, Cage is not triumphant, he's awake. He understands the fragility of everything, life, love, time, and still chooses to keep moving forward. That in itself is a revolution of the spirit. It's the same lesson tucked inside all great mythologies. Sisyphus rolling his boulder, the monk sweeping the temple floor, the artist painting another stroke, the holiness of repetition. Emily Blunt's Rita stands as a quiet counterpoint to that awakening. Her calm, her weariness, her discipline. She's what enlightenment looks like after endurance has burned away vanity. Their final gaze, brief and unspoken, carries the entire weight of film philosophy. Connection, however fleeting, is enough. You don't need forever to make something eternal. You just need presence. That moment, when Cage smiles at her in the closing scene, is cinema distilled to its purest essence, a single expression that contains infinite memory. The older I get, the more I understand why this film stays with people. It's not about aliens or war. It's about resilience, about the quiet grace of trying again, even when you know you might fail again. We live our own small loops, days that repeat, heartbreaks that echo, lessons we resist until they hurt. And every time we survive, we emerge a little sharper, a little humbler, a little more human. Edge of Tomorrow turns that invisible struggle into something visible. It says, you're not stuck, you're learning. Even its imperfections feel poetic. The awkward title change, the initial box office stumble, the slow rediscovery through streaming, all of it mirrors Cage's journey. The film itself had to fail first, learn patience, and come back stronger. It's like the universe decided to let it live out its own message. There's a strange comfort in that symmetry. Watching its rise from underappreciated experiment to modern classic is like witnessing a second birth. The world caught up to its wisdom, just as Cage eventually caught up to his purpose. Visually, the movie never stops teaching you. Every reset is a study in detail. The same faces, same motions, slightly altered outcomes. It reminds us that change doesn't require new worlds, only new attention. The cinematography, the sound, the choreography, they all conspire to say one thing. Look closer. What you dismiss as repetition may be evolution in disguise. Life rarely offers new scenery. It offers new perception. That's what Cage learns. And that's what we feel after credits roll. I think about the last few minutes often, that slow fade into calm after so much chaos. The morning light, gentle and forgiving, washing over the soldiers who don't know they've been saved. Rita standing there, untouched by memory, while Cage looks at her like a man seeing the future and the past in one breath. It's peaceful, yes, but also tragic. He carries lifetimes inside him, and she carries none of it. It's the quiet cost of knowledge. To love people who will never remember what you went through to reach them. Yet, he smiles anyway. He doesn't tell her who he is. He just chooses to begin again. That choice is the entire movie condensed into a single gesture. Mercy without explanation. And perhaps that's why it resonates so deeply. Because somewhere inside us, we all crave that reset. The chance to do it better. To say the right words this time. To save someone we couldn't before. But the film gently reminds us that even without the loop, we already have that chance every day. We wake up. We breathe. We move forward. That's our loop. And within that small, ordinary cycle, the extraordinary hides. Doug Liman's direction and Christoph Beck's music leave us with a strange kind of silence, not empty but complete. The explosions fade, the chaos quiets, and all that remains is rhythm, the sound of our own breath syncing with Cage's last exhale. It's in that silence that the film achieves something rare for action cinema, transcendence. It doesn't end. It settles like dust after a storm. You sit there still, realizing that you've been through your own loop watching it. Confusion, awe, exhaustion, understanding. It's not escapism. It's reflection disguised as entertainment. In many ways, Edge of Tomorrow is less about science fiction and more about human engineering, how the mind learns, how emotion matures, how courage evolves. The exosuit becomes a metaphor for all the armor we wear to face our fears, pride, sarcasm, denial, and the act of shedding that armor becomes enlightenment. When Cage finally surrenders his loop, it feels like letting go of ego itself. He doesn't win because he's stronger. He wins because he's finally soft enough to accept impermanence. If you strip the movie of its genre, what remains is almost spiritual, a meditation on consciousness. The omega at the end is the cosmic clock, the illusion of control. Cage's dive into it, his choice to destroy it by embracing finality, is symbolic suicide of the ego. He doesn't escape time. He dissolves into it. That's why the ending feels peaceful rather than triumphant. Death stops being punishment. It becomes release. Years later, when people rewatch the movie, they don't talk about its special effects. They talk about its soul. They talk about how it made them rethink their failures. One reviewer said, "It's the first action movie that feels like therapy." Another wrote, "I didn't just watch it, I lived it." That's the magic of true art. It doesn't just entertain. It evolves you. Every loop of the film, every viewing, changes how you see your own cycles of effort and error. In conversation with fans, Emily Blunt once said, "I think people love it because it tells them they can start again." And who doesn't need to hear that? I love that she said hear instead of believe. Because sometimes it's enough just to be reminded that starting over isn't failure, it's proof of life. That's what the film whispers every time Cage wakes up again. Try once more. Even after all these years, there's something hypnotic about its energy. It doesn't shout like most blockbusters. It breathes. It takes you by the shoulders and says, "Look, it's okay. You messed up. Everyone does. Now get up and go again." That quiet encouragement is why people return to it. The aliens, the armor, the time travel, they're all metaphors for endurance. What keeps the movie alive isn't its spectacle. It's its compassion. As a work of filmmaking, it stands as one of the rare blockbusters that manages to be both kinetic and contemplative. It moves fast but thinks deeply. It's made with muscles but remembered for its mind. The direction, the performances, the editing, all of it converges into a single emotional truth. Growth hurts, but it's worth it. And maybe that's why, even when the loop ends, the feeling lingers. You step out of the story, but it doesn't step out of you. I often imagine Cage years later, maybe waking up one more morning long after the war is over, looking out at a calm sky. He wouldn't remember everything clearly. Memory fades. But he carried the residue of his loops, that quiet wisdom that life has to be lived forward even if it's been felt backward. And somewhere, Rita would be out there, living her day without knowing the thousands of times he died for it. And that's okay. Because sometimes love doesn't need to be remembered to be real. It only needs to have existed once. Edge of Tomorrow ends with a sunrise, and maybe that's the only ending that fits a story like this. Because after every death, every defeat, every night that feels eternal, morning still comes. The loop always restarts, but we restart with it. A little wiser, a little gentler, a little more prepared to face the next storm. That's why, even after all these years, it feels less like a movie and more like a companion. A quiet reminder that you're allowed to keep trying, allowed to fail, allowed to begin again. So, my literature-loving friends, if you've come this far with me, through the mud, through the metal, through the endless repetition, take one lesson with you when the screen fades black. We all live, we all die, and we all repeat. But what makes each cycle sacred is how we carry what we've learned into the next. That is the real victory. That is what it means to be human. Thank you for walking through this loop with me. If this reflection moved you, if it made you think of your own repetitions and restarts, do leave a like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to CinemaVault. There are countless more stories to relive, countless more dawns to wake to, and together we'll keep discovering why every ending is just another beginning.